That's enough music for now, lads. Looks like there's dirty work afoot. Music for now, lads. That's enough music. Looks like there's dirty work afoot. Looks like there's dirty work afoot. Looks like there's dirty work afoot.
Do not fold, spin, or mutilate this program. Vyzygoth's Grassy Knoll continues.
Okay, this is Thinker Be Eaten, and we have with us, guess who? Andy Colvin. He's back. And he struck upon some things that are very interesting as it applies to his family, and I guess he's going to tell us, too, a kind of search, I guess, to a true identity of his own line. And it also ties in with, you know, the history that we've been told about and been we learned about in school, and yet there's something else going on. And what he has to share also deals with that particular element. And this whole bit about having, shall we say, a very myopic Western European slant. And maybe that's not the right one. So we're going to go all over the place, and we're going to cover a lot of ground, which is not unusual for us, and you people are used to it and apparently like it. I know I do. So, Andrew, thanks for coming back. But, I mean, if you had to put a one-line tagger on this show, what would that how would that read? Okay, that's good. That's good.
It's another one of these, what do you call them, blips, or something. They're, it's a pattern whereby, and it may relate to the moon, but I noticed that it was a full moon last weekend.
Yes, it was.
And certain things will, just the paranormal or whatever, the synchronistic aspect starts coming up. And I'm thinking that the synchronicities are some kind of learning tool, because it always, the result is, I have several days of just all this stuff coming in, and it takes a while to digest it. But as I digest it, I notice that I will start making the connections, and sometimes it happens at like 4 a.m. I'll wake up and it'll all be right there. All the stuff is there, and I don't know if I get it from the dream state or what, but then I start forming some kind of idea about it, and that's I guess the core thing I've been studying the whole time is how does it relate to creativity and learning, and it seems to do that, and it seems to go in cycles, and maybe even daily cycles.
But Andrew, it seems, you're on a quest, which is completely understandable. I mean, you've got a background, probably a landed family on both sides, your mom and dad, that go farther back than mine. And that obviously is a hold on you, and for good reason. And I get the feeling, that you're trying to find out where the trail leads to, where it ends, and what this all means. You can make sense of it once you get there. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Yes, and also, some of this stuff gets triggered by reading Peter Moon's book, and that may be. I'm sure that he doesn't trigger that in everybody, but there's some reason that it triggers it in me, and a lot of it has to do with the stuff involving the evolution of mankind, or the migration of the Moors from Africa out, and how that affected Freemasonry, and maybe is the origin of it, and
or even impacted the entire view of history that we Americans have assimilated for 2 centuries.
Yeah, and that's not just us, but that's all the European countries.
Yeah.
They all have this same, I don't know if it's an issue or whatever, but they, seems like none of the northern countries want to admit to their southern origins, and yet it's done. This is in the overt world, they do not want to make that admission, but in the covert world, where you sort of see Masonry and these other societies, they actually still revere the Egyptians and whatever technology and brain power went into the pyramids, and they continue to keep that alive, but it's all sort of on the sly, and I think that's why we don't hear more about these Montauk Indians.
Well, I have to say, now you've sent out some emails with a certain dispatch, I'll say, that was deserved and very interesting. I mean, it was different than some of the other emails I've gotten from you before. I mean, you could see that you were, your nose was bloodied and you were on the trail of something, and to see you with that kind of enthusiasm or earnestness, whatever you want to call it, I wrote back to you and I said, that is very interesting, and that wasn't just, some kind of lip service. When I looked at what you wrote, I'm like, whoa. And I put myself in your place as it would relate to me amongst this whole pastiche of what's going on. And, I tell you, they use that tired old analogy of the onion, but really it's true. I mean, this does lead and lead and lead upward, downward, sideways, and it just might have to be that way, and you just might be onto something. But let me ask you this question. We've talked about the Moorish influence. We'll call it alleged, okay, for those who aren't sold on it. And I'm like, okay, because I know something happened here before what we were told. I mean, there's just too much stuff going on, but it never seems to really come to fruition. So, all right, you have told me about the Moorish influence, and I'm like, yeah, okay, and I'm like, I'm listening, I'm not balancing either way, but now, even at this very day, when you sent me a link to that YouTube video, now I'm starting to say, okay, what really is going on? So I didn't necessarily just play along with you. I listened. And then I see this, and then what you've sent me of late, and I know we're not being told the real history. So just for the sake of starting maybe top down, and the listeners who are probably so totally confused by what I've just said, are we looking at a North American land, or whatever they called it back then, whose Aboriginal people were not necessarily Native Americans? We would call them Indians, all right, because we're going to argue about what's Native Americans here. Are we saying that there was something that went on before? And were you going there? Did you know about this video and what this Hakeem Bey had to say, or did you just come upon it because you were searching and you were led to this?
Yes, Jim sent that to me, that link.
Big Jim in Illinois?
Yeah. And so this is a Mississippi Delta tribe, more or less, not the Delta, but kind of further up in northern Louisiana. But I think there certainly seems to have been Moors there, because as the video shows, there are still Moors there who are claiming that they were always there. And their tribal name is Washita, which sounds ominously close to Washington. So, and since old George is rumored to have been of Moorish extract, then you have his name actually showing it.
But remember something too. When I see Washita, you know that is sadly an infamous town in what would be now what? Would that be Kansas? Where Custer just opened up. Do you remember that? The Washita is where Custer rode in on that tribe and just laid them to waste on a dawn, at a dawn raid. Are you familiar with that?
This is not the famous Custer raid, but another one? Or his last stand?
No, actually, this is probably something that led to the understandable angst and hatred of the Western tribes towards Custer, because he rode down on the Washita, I believe it was in Kansas, in the morning with the sun behind his back, the best way to come in on someone, and just, killed everybody. And that is recalled in A Little Big Man, where Dustin Hoffman grabs the patriarch and says, we'll stand under the flag, because he was told, if you stand under the flag, you'll always be protected. So the poor tribal chief goes out under the flag while everybody's getting killed. So the Washita massacre probably led to Custer's comeuppance in The Little Bighorn. So
it raises the question of how many of the Indian tribes are behind the Montauk's. Like, if those were descendants of Montauk, and they may not have been, but I mean, apparently, according to Moon, they all are. All the Indian tribes are, at least the ones that have been recognized. I should preface that. All the ones that have been recognized by the government are all. They use the Montauk's records to prove those things. The Montauk's kept records much as the Egyptians did, because as they say, they are the Egyptians. So their record keeping was very good, and the names go back to, Pharaoh. But in some cases where there was intermingling with other races, like the Dutch, which is where my family got involved, the Dutch started calling them Fowlers or Fullers instead of Pharaoh. And so the Fowler name is a common one for showing Indian ancestry, and Fuller as well, and that's the name of the earliest Colvin that we can find in a quick search of Google. who married a fuller whose descendants were from the Mayflower, which gives you an indication that there was some intermarriage earlier than that, probably with the Montauk's, which gave her the fuller name. And the Dutch even kidnapped one of the Montachian princesses at one point in order to force their way into marrying into the family. So it was considered an honor to marry into the Pharaoh clan by some Europeans. And I think
let's grab hold of this though.
This would lead to Masonry, for one thing.
All right,
so go ahead.
But we got to lay some ground rules down with regard to a foundation which is going to support what we're going to talk about.
Right.
Because now we've thrown out three things. We've thrown out Egyptians / Pharaoh, Montauk's, and Moors. Now, do you want to lay down just like an Encyclopedia Britannica type of what relationship we're dealing with here? Are we looking at what is the relationship to what you had talked about, the Moorish influence in North America with the Montauk's?
Well, they claim to have come straight from Egypt.
The Montauk's.
Yeah.
All right.
Cairo, and Moore traces all the Egyptians back to Western Africa, and those people had blue blood, blue skin, very dark, resulting in a lot of imagery throughout the Egyptian and other cultures of blue goddesses, blue queens. They were generally Rh negatives. They had a different kind of blood. They had more copper. So there's a little bit of confusion after reading his book if they were Rh negative, all Rh negative or what. But that's something that's still talked about today. Is the people who have Rh negative are from the stars. They don't have monkey DNA in their blood.
They don't?
They do not.
Okay.
They're different, and they're very rare. But those are the ones that Moon claims are known to have had self-pregnancies. Back in Africa, that's where all of the stories come from of this happening. And it's supposedly because of that rare blood, they secrete a male hormone or a male hormone that's similar enough to sperm that they can have virgin conceptions. But it involves a lot of ritual and stuff as well to prepare the body to make that happen. So, I'll just jump ahead to now and make a crazy connection from that, and then we can talk more about the structure. But there actually was a woman in West Virginia back in the day who claimed to have gotten pregnant in this manner. And she's Rh negative, and her family trees are very old in West Virginia, and if indeed the Moors or the Egyptians in particular came to the Ohio Valley, which they say they did. The Montauk's say our tribe actually migrated to Ohio and built all these mounds. So,
but they emanated from Long Island.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that line is still there, mixed into the white folk, and this person is a blonde who had this spontaneous pregnancy.
All right, let me ask you this: would that necessarily make someone like she a hermaphrodite?
I don't know. I don't think so, because it just happens during the ovulation period or something. It's just a secretion. It's not a body part or anything.
All right, so it's not like a male-female thing. It's just actually what we're looking at, and it's just, excuse the phraseology, I don't want to mince it too much. It's almost like an immaculate conception.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
Yeah, and there's a scientific way to explain it, and it does happen in nature, although people just don't believe it can happen in people. But it does happen in other species.
Okay.
So, and this person was a Mothman witness too, and so it raises the question of whether or not these sites that were set up by either Moors. Moors is a more general term than Egyptians, right? So
right. Mm-hmm.
Moors working with Mound technology that we've discussed before. I noticed, like in the American history of, there's some famous logs studying mounds that you can look up in the national records. And I ordered one, and it actually has a picture of a guy meditating inside of a mound, but it's a skeleton. So that sort of clarifies all the talk we had with Denton and everything about the mounds. There's actually drawings in there or diagrams showing skeletons that were taken out in a meditation pose that were dead. So this is a Buddhist thing where they are meditating their way through the death process. And the fact that they're doing it inside of a mound connotes the idea that the mound is absorbing that energy and then may emanate it later, causing people to see creatures, have prophecies, and so on. And my question is this somehow... It's not even a question. It's already been answered, actually. The question is, do people of this ancestry have more unusual paranormal phenomenon? And the answer is yes, because, you can look to even, I heard him on Ghost to Ghost last week, a guy who claims to have done some Mothman research, Daryl Sims. He's a former CIA guy, but even he was saying 50% of the people having UFO abductions are either Cherokee or Irish. And both of those tribes are believed, at least by Moon, and he gives a lot of information to back it up, that those are from Egypt as well. So does heredity affect, these emanations coming through? And what is the purpose? Moon in his new book is saying that there's a second coming of the pharaohs coming real soon, that there will be some sort of resurgence of their tribe and the truth will come out. I certainly think if it did come out, it would be met with a lot of resistance because it's important for them, for whatever reason, to keep it in the covert.
To be below the radar, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, all right, let me ask you this. First of all, I've seen the stuff you sent me, and I'm going to trust you to this. Do you feel that Moon is credible with the research he's done?
I do, because I think he writes it carefully enough. He really, if he's making a slight bit of a jump, he says so, and you can sense that he's doing that. I was just thinking about, I figured you might ask that question. I was comparing Moon, if he's making a jump, it's very clear, and it's someone like who's a firebrand preacher. They'll get up and they believe 100% in what they're saying, and they beat people over the head in a way, and some people buy that, but a lot of people don't, and I think that Moon's methods are good because he doesn't force you to believe it. He's not dogmatic about it.
All right. But now, I don't mean to jump ahead, and I probably am, so tell me, we'll deal with this later. When you sent me the link to the video by Bay and what's being promoted there, that doesn't seem like there was any migration westward from the Moors, which we would say, okay, they came from Africa. Now, this may not be the time to table that, but, understand this is where I'm coming from after you sent me that, and I'm listening to all this. How are you on the possibility? And actually, I would have to look back in Scripture for my own purposes as to the dispersal of the tribes. We call them Moors, and everybody obviously conjures the idea that this was basically blacks in Saharan Africa, not sub-Saharan, but Saharan Africa, that had obviously a very developed culture and were somewhat a military might that might have gotten over here earlier, but the stuff by Bay said no, there was no migration. We're the original people. Do you want to tackle that now, or do you want to put that off later?
I would say that right now, just today,
put
this
that
weekend,
off?
I'm not concerning myself with it.
Okay, no problem. And that's
but let me, that's like a detail. The details of how the migration went are certainly something that people can argue about, and I think you could also argue that they came around from Europe. And you got to remember, the migration came at different times over hundreds and thousands of years. So one group arriving might not have the same exact skin tone. They may have gone up to Europe and been there a while, like the Welsh. The Welsh, who were considered to be Egyptian, and they have Egyptian words in their language and things. So they eventually migrated at some point here in the last 1,000 years, or actually maybe it was 1,500 years.
Well, I'd have to talk to Ackerman about this, but if there were a time, and I trust Ackerman for this, John Ackerman, but if there were a time when all the land masses were basically joined, then there's no migration. I mean, in a sense, if you know what I mean. There's no vast expanse of water to conquer.
Although there was a long, long period of time, probably, unless that was a cataclysmic event, there was a lot of time for other people to come in and mix with the people that stayed there. So I think, then you get into to trying to figure out, and maybe that's better for them to do. The tribes themselves can figure out, well, who were the people that were actually here first, and then who were the ones that came later. And,
yep. But you did ask me to watch that video for one purpose, and of course, me going further than that was not what we were going to agree upon as far as what would be the purview of what we about which we spoke. But you wanted me to take a look at the layout of the city, and can I ask you about that now?
Yes, because that is a bird
mound.
Huge bird mound. And the mound is not only a mound itself, but when you view it from the sky, it's sitting on a huge mound, which is all these concentric rings that had houses on them.
And is this
so
the one
it
that
looks like he's holding a snake, or multiple snakes, like the Garuda. And I've talked about, anytime you have an outstretched figure on a mound, you're talking about a motif that gets into the creation of matter, the creation of spirit, or the transferal of one into the other. You have Christ, you have the Garuda, you have all these symbols, potent symbols having to do with that. But I think it shows that the Moors were, at least the ones that were here, were a little more into the bird. Well, actually, the Egyptians were too. All their gods have bird heads, pretty much, a lot of them. So, that's something that I think relates to the Mothman story, in that these tribes were, in order for them to go that far to build that mound, they probably had been seeing birdmen or bird gods already. And so I think it shows that this is a long time, ongoing thing, and still happening in these old sites where they once lived and had their mounds and things. And I'm wondering if some of these, if these are time traveling kind of things, machines in a way, because they do seem to create situations where you can see into the future, and that seems to involve magnetism and having a dynamic in magnetism. If you're hit with a certain field and it just is the same field over and over, it's not going to cause your mind to lapse into a state where it might interact with something from another dimension. But if the field is dynamic and highly complex, the mind, I think, somehow gets confused, or it ties into it somehow, and suddenly you have the person interacting with an entity. And they actually covered this in a show not too long ago. What was the name of the show? It's here somewhere. It was a TV show on the Discovery Channel called Beyond Tomorrow. And I saw it on August 15th, and it was about Muncaster Castle, which is a Mon word in England, where the ghost of a court jester was sending people. Well, I don't want to get into that, but I believe it was that. It's where the word tomfoolery came from. There was a court jester who was killing people, and that's where the name comes.
That's beautiful. Okay.
But I think it was that show where they talked about how the metal matrix in a bed, the grid of a bed, the old way they used to make beds, that in the presence of a certain earth field, geomagnetic field, it would become way more complex because the field was interacting with the metal, and since the metal was setting up a pattern, the field would start moving around the metal, and this would cause the person to see a ghost in that room. And I think, and that's also what we see with the mounds, that they often have different readings.
And by the way, earth magnetism, I understand as being necessary for wholly and completely functioning human beings. Would that be correct? We need magnetism.
Well, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why, for those who believe that a pole shift might be in order, this would create havoc, because it actually, beyond whatever it does geologically, would also screw up everybody's brain. Would that be an accurate statement?
Say that again?
We all know the Earth has magnetism and it's good for us. And it seems that it's necessary for a lot of reasons.
Oh, you're saying it would, yeah, it would, I agree, it would.
Okay, yeah, and that is, forget the pole shifts and all that other kind of stuff, everybody would kind of have their brains go like on, call Verizon. So, we went down.
I could read a paragraph written by John Keel about this topic.
If you got it?
I happen to have it in my notes. I don't know, I think it's from the 8th Tower.
Do you have it right there? Good.
Yeah. It says, Dr. Carl Jung viewed the superspectrum from a slightly different angle. He speculated about a collective unconscious, a supermind composed of the unconscious minds of all humanity, having a will and reality all its own. But ancient Chinese philosophers did him one better. They visualized a monstrous spirit inhabiting space and feeding on the souls of earthlings. We were nothing but moon food in the cosmic order. Ivan T. Sanderson went one step further, saying if the collective unconsciousness existed like a magnetic blanket over the entire planet, and if it could manipulate our reality independently, then it would mean that this world is really a living organism with a mind of its own. To assure its own survival, it has to feed off of us. It has to jolly us along, as Ivan put it, urging us to breed and giving us some kind of hope so we wouldn't throw up our hands and commit genocide. The Earth needs us because each one of us is a cell in its massive brain. Just as the human brain controls each cell and organ in its body, the supermind has the power to control each of us and can direct our individual and collective destinies. In short, the Earth itself is God. Some religions teach that humans are put here to house souls. Earth is a kind of farm, and people are its most important product. Other religions believe that souls move from one body to another in the long and boring process of reincarnation. The soul is being educated slowly over many generations, and when it finally receives its celestial diploma, it is free to drift into space and become part of the cosmic mind. The cosmic mind, not the Earth mind.
All right. All right, now, to shift gears necessarily, and we can come back, because this is not perhaps a bad juncture at which to revisit something else. Do you want to talk about what took place, since we had not spoken to each other in some time, August, and the synchronicities that listeners are kind of used to us going over?
Oh, yeah.
Would this be, yeah, I think it would be an okay time to just put this in as a codicil.
I could also throw out a couple of just random pieces of information. You want me to do that? I'll do that.
Is that during that? Oh yeah, of course. Everything goes.
Yeah, I got these pages with just one thing on them, and I want to get them out of my way.
Get them out of your brain. Go ahead.
One is Hepzibah, which is a bird woman, a thunderbird. Let's see. What was I saying? Hepzibah is a thunderbird woman. Anyway, I believe I better look this up while I'm talking about it.
Does this have anything to do with Hezbollah?
Well, instead of defining who Hepzibah is, I'll just say that it says in here that she's an emanation of Zarathustra.
Okay.
Yeah, and somehow relating to that is the idea that male entities come before the woman entity in most encounters. Patrick Harper was writing about this. Throughout history, you'll often see a hooded man, and then you'll see a hooded woman, but it's the Virgin Mary, and sometimes her hood is seen as a halo. And during all this stuff this weekend, I went down to the Columbia City here in Seattle, which is an old Masonic town, and I saw a startling sculpture, which is of an orca fin, or a whale fin, which would normally be held by the Thunderbird in their cosmology here. But there's no Thunderbird. There's just the fin, and inside the fin is a figure carved, and it's very intricately done, and it's got glass where the head is. So the head is a circle. It has a pointed hood. Sunlight goes through that, and from the backside, it's this awesome image that you see.
But Andy, you sent me all those, and what I'm thinking is that they're all phallic.
They are.
Okay.
The male is implied in the whale fin, but I'm just saying that the thing that got me was that it looked so much like the Flatwoods Monster and the thing that Harriet had seen on Woodward Drive, and the thing she saw was male first, and then it became this female, and anyway, it was just I sent it to her, and she was stunned. I mean, she's really shocked by the strange coincidence that we have. And keep in mind, it's called the Spirit of Washington. The sculpture is called the Spirit of Washington, which, if you think about it, if his name is Washita, it means the spirit of the Moors. And so one could say that Harriet saw the spirit of the Moors. If this sculpture is correct in saying that this figure in the sculpture is the Spirit of Washington. And you wonder why is the state of Washington way out here named after Washington?
That's what I was thinking, yep.
And that must have to do with the large number of Native Americans that live here, I would think.
Yeah, because, I mean, living in the Northeast, I'm used to, okay, we got Washington District of ISIS, we have Washingtonville in Jersey, and Washington's in Pennsylvania, and then all of a sudden you got Washington State, as late as it came after his death. And I don't even know if there was any, even at the groundswell after his death, and how people try to commemorate things in someone's name. But I never could understand the jump that all of a sudden where you live became Washington State. It's like, can you tell me what the connection is here?
Yeah, it must have something to do with the Masons too. I think they have there's a strong Catholic Church history here too.
Yeah, but remember something, supposedly, the Romanists and the Masons don't get along. So, I mean, that's supposed to be, for public consumption. However, that's true below the surface, I don't think so. But you would think one would not be playing ball with the other. But, be that as it may.
But the Jesuits would have been here for the Indians, and I'm sure they were.
Yeah, well, they were, of course.
And in fact, there's this story that I recently came across this weekend about that there was a pharaohic tribe in the Ohio Valley that came to the attention of the Jesuits early on, and they went there to study them. And then somehow the tribe was wiped out, but the Jesuits were wiped out as well, supposedly. But the scrolls they made with all the information about the tribe were stored in a cave, which was later found by a guy in Ohio, and that scroll was taken back by the Vatican, but not before Joseph Smith got a look at it. And Joseph Smith apparently may have taken the stuff in there, and coupled with his year spent at a Morris school. There's my phone. Sorry about that.
That's beautiful. Nice background music.
So Smith spent that year at a Morris school connected to the Montauks somehow. And picked up enough to come up with his story.
Smith went to a Moorish school?
Yes, for a year.
And where would that have been? Do you know geographically?
In New York.
Upstate?
It's in Moon's book, which is the Montauk Book of Living.
Well, the reason
I just read it, and I can't remember all the names and dates, and I may get some of them wrong, in fact.
No, but I mean, as I told you, I'll just say this for everyone else, but, for a year I lived on the east side of Vermont, near the Connecticut River, and in Royalton, where there is the birthplace, and it's commemorated with a very eerie and very big statue of Joseph Smith on the east side of the White River. And then apparently he went from there, and the finding the scrolls and all that stuff apparently took place somewhere around Binghamton. So, if that's your understanding of it, that's my understanding of it, and whatever that means, it means. But so he was birthed in Vermont, and then apparently had his epiphany in Binghamton, New York.
Yeah, and it's unlikely that he would have been at that school if he didn't have Moorish blood already. So, and he was a Mason as well by the time he came up with his story. So, and I think when was the anti-Mason movement? Was that after him?
Around 1820, 1830. Anti-Mason movement.
So that's about the same time, right?
Yes, it is. Okay,
so I think, it seems like and I've read some stuff about it over the years, but I'm not like a scholar of all this, but it seems that like the first obvious thing is that because of the anti-Mason movement, the Masons decided to come up with another church that would carry on the Egyptian obsession with genealogies, the whole thing. And that's why you find, I don't know why you find so many Egyptian things in Utah, but they've dug up several sites there. They have sarcophagi and Egyptian hieroglyphics on plates and everything.
Well, two things. One, and the Mormons would get very incensed about this, but, screw you if you can't take a joke. And that is, and Rita Williams does a lot of this on her, or has collected information on her website. I think it's Cephas Ministry. The reason I say that because there's a Cephas Ministries, which is in Canada. It's not the same one. So forgive me for not knowing exactly which one it is, but Rita laid out the similarities between Freemasonry and Mormon symbology. And, I mean, you can't argue it. So, I mean, whatever it is, that they found fertile ground in Utah, yeah, okay, great. But, yes, I mean, there's no doubt about it. And, of course, you said that Smith was a Freemason and that he wound up out there in Utah. And, obviously, here we have the Mormons with their tabernacles, which are festooned with Freemasonry symbology, which I've told you also, though, Andrew, it goes beyond Freemasonry, and it goes back to Babylon, cult worship. And although the Freemasons have run with it, I understand that. This goes way back and is a lot deeper in its occult roots than Freemasonry. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, the big shift that occurred somewhere back then was a shift from the feminine to the masculine in how they were doing their rituals, because the Moors, and I still have a hard time, with the Freemasonry is Moorish. I mean, it really is, and we've been so inculcated to think of it as white guys down the street or something, but it's not. It's really this ancient Egyptian thing, and anyway, I lost track of where I was going.
Well, but here's one of the other things is that as I was growing up, and we looked at Shriners and such, and all the good work they did, and there were football games, and they were sponsors, and we would look at them, and I'm like, what's with the fez? You guys are Shriners, but what's with the fez and the scimitar and, some kind of Egyptian gobbledygook? And, you look at it and go like, okay, fine. And, you were talking before about, even the Native Americans. I mean, you had the mummers in Philadelphia, who come out every Thanksgiving, and I'm like, what's with the headdresses and all that kind of stuff? But we look at this and we accept it. And what you and I are talking about is trying to scratch through that, saying, why is this? And, who else is asking about what is the connection necessarily between certain organizations in the United States and occult symbology.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, I remember where I was. I was talking about the Moors being feminine, that they, in the sense that they worship the cat, and this got transmuted into the Virgin Mary more so in the Catholic world. But, you know, I think the Virgin Mary is a bona fide entity that people are seeing. They're obviously seeing this thing, this female emanation, and it's important. And I mean, I'll give them credit for doing that. But as you were saying, they kind of, you know, took it a bit too far, perhaps.
Well, all I know is, I mean, and yes, we did talk about this privately, but, and this is not a male-female thing. I mean, it's not a sexist thing. But, you know, whenever you see the presence heavily of a female in any kind of tribute, and I know that sounds, you know, really bad, but here's where I'm going. Catholics are preoccupied with Mary, and though Mary, as the story goes, had an immaculate conception, she is yet a human, and in the Christian church, she did not hang on the cross to pay the price for your sins. Jesus did. But Marianism, as it's called, is replete in the Catholic Church to the point where, and I can tell you expressly, that when I was working at St. Leo University, I mean, Mary was numero uno, and Jesus was like a player to be named later. Now, going past that, look at our own government. What's with Lady Liberty on the silver dollars? What's with the Statue of Liberty? What's with the District of Columbia? And also, as I was reading a biography about Garfield, sent to me by Gordon Comstock, Garfield happened to be, I guess, in Congress or whatever, when they placed upon the Capitol dome the statue of the Goddess of Liberty. Well, what the hell does goddess have to do with anything? And so what I would say is it goes back to the occult worship of the Queen of Heaven, also manifested by, and I know I'll always screw this name up, Chris Knowles always kills me for this, but it's Semiramis or whatever you want to call it. So we have this preoccupation with the female, which is, you know, and of course females will get pissed about this, but too bad, which is a cult.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to. There's a whole thing with trying to figure out what, and at least Moon tries to do it, but I've never heard it done very well in all the different healing courses I've taken. I've never heard anyone really explain what the feminine. You can do it generally. What is feminine and what is masculine? One's more, you know, reflective, or I mean, the woman is more of the water or of the earth. There's a circuitousness or a mystery to it. You know, and there's these general things you can say, but there's not much more you can say. And sometimes when you get into a discussion of this in religion, you know, you can get confused if it has to do with sex or qualities. And it's harder to do the qualities. It's hard to figure out, even if a person is, regardless of what their sex is, they're emanating qualities which can be from the other sex. And if there's not a real language for that, which I don't think there really is. I think we have one, but it's kind of a limited dialogue. It's not real clear. It's real basic, and it's not, I don't know, it doesn't help, you know.
Well, that's why we have Dr. Phil to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, still.
These are people, I've studied with people that really should know what the answer is, and they often don't really have it, or they have it, but it's hard to put into words, and that may be because they're just concerned with the political dialogue. The atmosphere isn't good in America for doing that. There's a lot of blowback if you even try to get into it. So,
yeah. Agreed.
But one of the things you were talking about Mary and her name in Egyptian. Well, that's based on the root of Mau. M-A-U is cat in Egyptian, and Ma is often used as well. So Mary sort of means of the cat. And well, I found this cat name happening a lot, and Moon did too. But it also happens in my family. Like my son has the name means cat, son of the cat. His best friend has a different name, but it's son of the cat or a cat name. And both of their names also have olive references in them too. And olives were what drove Moon to write the book. He was just following the trail of the olive, and because it does relate to Christ, and it's this potent symbol in different cultures.
Yeah, but I mean, the olive tree, no doubt about. But what about that? I mean, without getting too deep into it.
Well, the first time I called Harriet about what I was finding out, she was at the Olive Garden in Columbus.
That doesn't count.
Says I've never been to here like in years. There she was. But anyway, go ahead.
No, I mean, olive does have symbology, and also its practicality. I guess would that be considered a fruit? I think I don't know. In the Middle East, but what else is there about the olive? I mean, in other words, I've never known their branches or the fruit to be necessarily symbology. Am I missing something there?
Well, it lit the lamp of for the Hebrews when they were under assault in Solomon's temple. It anointed Christ, and the way the phrasing of it in the Bible is that it makes him the Christ. There's something about the olive that makes him the Christ, and the olive is a symbol for the feminine. So the underlying message in the Bible is one of the esoteric symbols about Christ is that he was using his femininity in his life and in his work, and so.
And Moon runs with the olive thing. Yeah,
and I found some other olive references, but I won't go into them. But like with the cat thing, there's a lot of interesting stuff too. And like with Union Carbide, I had my dad's identification card on my blog, and it shows the 3 pyramids in the background. And the emblem of the carbide was the black cat, which is definitely Egyptian, the black cat. So carbide is showing their Masonic roots in some of their logos and things. But Harriet was saying that her name, she never liked her name, and I haven't done any research on it, but I think it might be related to Horus, which would be a male name and a Birdman name.
And I just want to remind listeners that Harriet was a guest on the show, the Harriet about which Andrew speaks, for what took place in their childhood, and she was on one other time. So at any rate, and by the way, is she doing okay?
Yeah.
All right. Good.
But she took the name of Celeste when she was christened, and that relates to the stars. And of course, the whole Egyptian thing has to, at least with the feminine, has to do with bringing the feminine energies from certain stars into the chambers and creating these Mary-like entities, or interacting with them, or something.
But isn't the whole layout of the pyramids and the Sphinx to mimic the Stargate in heaven?
Well, some say that, but it's just filled with various symbologies. One of which is the 5-6 ratio, or the 56. The capstone is 1/56 of the total pyramid. The pyramid is 1/56 of the Nile Plateau. The plateau is 1/56 of Egypt or Africa. I can't remember which. And Africa is 1/56 of the world. And the 5 and the 6 symbolize the pentagram and the hexagram. And there's a symbol. There's a way to combine those two, which is a sperm or an insemination thing. You turn the star upside down, and then you have, and then you have the hexagram which has 6 stars impregnating it.
All right, but hold on, folks. Think about this. Let's face it. I mean, this is one of the things that I've been on, and that is the star that we know on our flags. I mean, Andrew, really, that doesn't look that star does not look like a star in heaven. what we're dealing with is a pentagram, and what you're saying is when you put the pentagram on end so that one point is down with the 2 points up, receding, shall we say, and the hexagram comes down, that now we're dealing with something sexual and also intertwining DNA and else, right?
Right. It can be twisted into a DNA strand, and it looks like one. And so there's some encoded information, and it relates to this whole 1111 thing you and I have been talking about.
Yeah. All right. So what are we looking at with the relationship and the intertwining of the pentagram and the hexagram?
Well, it not only does it look like sexual penetration, the same that you see in the Masonic sign that's on all the buildings, the intertwining rulers, geometry with the G inside.
Okay.
It's like that. It's the hexagram.
Let me ask you this, and just clarify this. Would we recognize the hexagram nowadays as, quote, the Star of David? The 6-pointed star?
Yes.
All right, and the pentagram we all are familiar with.
Yeah.
So now we're dealing with an occult.
And typically the upside-down pentagram is viewed as satanic, but in the sense that, going back to that bigger issue of the feminine being driven out of some of the later religions, especially Islam. Well, although, again, it's hard to talk about because there's so many things going on. There's always an overt patriarchalness to most of these religions.
True.
An inverted less than obvious feminine aspect going on. And somewhere in history, it went from the women being more overtly revered to women being, the feminine being, I shouldn't even say the women, I should say the feminine being less obvious. And you could talk for years about all the different ways that plays out in human affairs. And I think, it's, the feminine energy is always there, and it's, whether or not it's being oppressed, I don't know. I think it's, in certain towns like Seattle, you see a high degree of feminine energy, I think. And you see an inversion. I actually saw a T-shirt this weekend of an inversion of the Garuda emblem of the male birdman above the feminine, or emanating from the feminine serpent. And now we're seeing T-shirts with the Virgin Mary carrying what might be, I guess it might be Parsifal. Is he the young man who flies and falls to earth?
Parsifal?
Is it Parsifal?
Yeah, I'm not deep on that. No.
Anyway, she's carrying the Birdman and she actually has claws in this one T-shirt. And that was at the same time I went to see the statue that had the Flatwoods Monster Virgin Mary entity in it. So, and then there was a strange sighting of a woman that I wasn't there, but these guys I was with thought it was very strange, like they were seeing the most beautiful woman they'd ever seen. And we'd just been talking about all of this stuff before that, and I don't think they were making it up. They seemed genuinely shocked by her appearance. And I was joking with them that was perhaps some kind of modern Virgin Mary emanation. Mm-hmm. But this strand, or this connection of the hexagram and pentagram, can be twisted into a shape that looks like a DNA strand.
Like a helix of sorts? No?
Yes, and it also looks like, it also has a strong relationship to the tree of life in the Kabbalistic tradition. And it also, I was just noticing, it's similar in some ways to the holy mountain of harmonics that we talked about, which is on the border of Indiana and Illinois, which used to be circled by the tribe of Ishmael every year. And the time period it's given, is congruent with the time when the scrolls from Ohio that supposedly belonged to an Egyptian tribe had been found again. Well, actually, that was their migration started before those scrolls were found that they know of. That they don't have exact dates on when these migrations started, but they were like pilgrimages. And this holy mountain is shown with a hexagram inside of it and a bunch of letters, which may relate either to sound or to some DNA structure. So there's a lot of high tech information encoded in the pyramid and some of these symbols. And I think the Masons, they want to keep that alive for whatever reason. It's so complex, the whole Masonic thing, but you can say that, I think you can say that as far as the pharaohs go, or the people that just are in that line, they still carry weight in a covert way in the government, because Moon was saying that like 30 of the presidents have Montauk-ian blood. So there's somebody knows about this at some level, and and you were saying that the Dutch who intermarried early with the Montauks were able to keep a lot of their prime lands in the Hudson River Valley, which is an example of how it sort of all just went underground, but that the power is sort of still there.
Well, I mean, we always laughed at the estates that were lined up on the east side of the Hudson, just about from Yonkers up to Albany, which included names that people will remember. Van Cortlandt, Rensselaer. Who else is involved in that? Oh, man.
Van Tassels.
That sounds like from a Headless Horseman. But, I mean, Van Buren, I believe, which is one of our earlier presidents, was brought up in Kinderhook on the east side of the Hudson again, and he spoke Dutch. That was his native tongue until, obviously, for other reasons. But you had Roosevelt on that side, too, and Vanderbilt. There were others. I mean, that east side of the Hudson is just resplendent, if you want to look at it that way, with the old Dutch supposed patroon families who never gave up the goods. And if you're interested, Martha Stewart's there, too.
Yeah. And Verplank Colvin was Dutch, and may explain why, this connection to the Montauks may explain why he was able to have such an influence in the...
And prosper in that area?
What?
And prosper in that area.
Yeah, he was a lawyer. He, made legislation when he was in the Congress and so forth. And
for people who have never listened to us before, and I did not say this to you except in the early shows, but I told you that Colvin was a name familiar to me only because I encountered it in a couple of towns in western Vermont that were adjacent or juxtaposed exactly against New York's east side, and that was a prominent family. We talked about that, not that you're necessarily aware of them or anything's happened in that time, but that Colvin name has a certain kind of prominence in certain areas in what would be called, I guess now, Rutland County.
Well, this explains it because they married into the Montauks in the 1700s, and or the Dutch did, and then the Dutch intermingled with the Colvins. I mean, that's how it went.
Yeah.
And the earliest Colvin, well, actually, it may bypass the Dutch completely because the earliest Colvin that they have good records on came and married a Montauk woman, and it would have been one of the pharaohs because her name was transliterated to Fuller. Did I mention that before?
I don't think you did, Andy.
Okay, Fowler and Fuller are the names that are used to verify all the tribes in the country actually trace back to the Montauks in some way. And Fuller and Fowler are the names that you would find that had been changed from Pharaoh, but do mean Pharaoh. So Colvin came right over, married right into the pharaohs.
I just want to tell you this, and I'm sorry for being a little distant. I did hear what you had to say, but I was working a laptop on my side, and I hit Colvin plus Vermont, and we have biography Enoch Colvin in Paulet, Vermont, which is again on the, did I say it's west side, New York's east side, very close to the border. Lucy Colvin, Rutland County. You got a whole bunch of relatives up there, bro.
Well, what happened was this first guy who married the Pharaoh daughter had a son. Well, first of all, they moved to Albany right away. So there you go. They moved right from Montauk to Albany. And then the son, what was the story about him? He did something interesting.
And let's say this also at that time too. That was all under Dutch rule. That was still Dutch. And I'll tell you this. I mean, as you might have to look for what you have to do. I was raised in the summer times in the Hudson Valley in Ulster County, and it was completely Dutch. I mean, it was all there. So the influence was still there, despite the fact that obviously they lost their holdings, but the Dutch influence still remained, not only in architecture, but obviously in genealogy. Well,
it was a good move on the Van Tassels to steal that princess or kidnap her. However that happened, I don't know if they kidnapped her, but they ended up, that may be the reason why they were able to keep so much land.
But you also have to laugh because, I mean, obviously Washington Irving, being a British lineage, understood that he lived right in the middle of the turmoil where the Dutch lost supposedly their holdings in the Hudson Valley to the Brits before the American Revolution. And isn't it interesting that Irving would use the name Van Tassel, which I believe was the Headless Horseman's last name, wasn't it? Or Brom Van Bones, but
I don't remember.
All right, no, Van Tassel. Okay, all right. Now I'm tripping out here. But all right, but that name Van Tassel, I believe, was involved in one of Irving's stories. But still, in all, Irving was a pretty sprite fellow and made a little money on writing about the friction after the fact between the Dutch, obviously, and the British.
Well, Moon said that his car broke down when he hit the Sleepy Hollow Bridge, the bridge that's in the story. So that was part of his story.
All right. I've been through there on a motorcycle and such, Tarrytown and all that, Sleepy Hollow. It's all right. But anyway. And I believe, who lived there also, and it was chronicled in a movie with Nicholson as one of the writers. Oh, there's the whole thing that went on there, and I can't remember it now. It'll come to me. I'm sorry for even mentioning that. But it was I think it might have been, I don't know, two authors who were vying for the affections of a particular female that took place, again, on the Dutch East Bank. And, of course, remember something, too. Roosevelt and his lineage arose from there as well.
Well, I remember my brother telling me that we were related to that Colvin guy that I was mentioning before. So that would mean that we are direct descendants of I guess, Egyptian royalty.
And that is because
all the four sides of my family have Moorish blood.
All right, but restate that also, because Colvin, how does that go back as far as etymology and genealogy? That comes from Gibson, or how does that work out?
Well, Colvin means tenant in chief, or supervisor, or caretaker, and it goes back to way back centuries in England. But there are also contingents that ended up in Scotland and Wales, and the Gibson side of my family is also from England or Wales, and they were one of the families that were being called Moorish during World War II. In other words, they were calling themselves Indians to get out of the draft or something. I think to get out of the draft, and the government was saying, no, you're black. And I've got cousins that have, look black, have all the characteristics, were thought to not be white and were kept out of schools. This is in my lifetime. The Colvins, both the Colvins that went to New York, which are the ones I'm from, and the ones who went to Virginia or would be considered Moorish. The ones in Virginia were the ones that they're also going after the Colvins, and both of the Colvins and the Gibsons were being, the government was after them during World War II.
Well, I mean, you sent me a post, and I don't know if you want to put that up on your own site or if you want me to or whatever, however you want to handle it. But, I mean, what that looked like was that Colvin was a name, and this kind of harkens to the Red Menace that would happen later on about names of those who might be considered communists. Your name was considered those who might be mixed blood and therefore Negro. Right.
But there are also a lot of them that fought during the Revolutionary War and such, and it's generally thought to be an Irish name, so that's kind of strange. But it's...
Yeah, but it could be. But then again, don't we go back to the point where what was the etymology of that before the Irish, if you will? I mean, could we take it back to the fact that, again, this emanates, and I'm not saying this is the case, but I'm wondering out loud, okay, we know it is Irish, no doubt about it, but where its true roots? Are we going back to Moors?
Yeah, because there's a lot of evidence that the Scotch-Irish, at least, that Scotland was an Egyptian colony originally.
All right, now, before we go any further, I just want to do this just for the heck of it. But I called up on the other laptop, Colvin, and, of course, it says Rutland, Lake Region, and Killington Real Estate. Go check out John Colvin. We also have in Woodstock, Vermont, the Pentangle Council on Arts, Sean Colvin, who's a she, and she's a very good, I don't know if you ever heard Sean Colvin, but she's an excellent country singer, who's, probably gone by the boards along with, who else was in that clan? I forget. Anyway, we won't worry about that. Also, America's first wrongful murder conviction case, and it involved Russell Colvin. Also, a murder in 19th century Vermont, or was it really murder? And that involved Russell Colvin. And then Danby, Vermont Real Estate, and we have Colvin Hill in Danby, which, again, is on the west side of Vermont. I'll tell you what, if you allow me to do this, I'd like to hit that murder in 19th century Vermont. I don't mean to belabor it, but I just wanted to say, before I ever met you, and when I was made aware of you, I told you because I was writing for the Rutland Herald and I had a lot to do in the towns of Pulteney and Fairhaven, which are right up against New York's eastern border, that the Colvin family was alive and well. All right, what it's coming up with is I'm not going to do that. It's all with Google. But anyway, I mean, I don't know what I'm saying with that, but that's your family, and are you saying at that time in particular, Andrew, that comes out of a Colvin or a Montauk relationship?
That what does?
Well, I mean, the Colvins spring up, obviously, in New York. And as I, encountered them, in the 20th century in western Vermont, those are your people, I would assume. And
oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm from the New York, from the Glens Falls contingent.
All right, so that's right up there. So okay, fine.
Yeah, and anyway, and the other names I have in the family are the other two other Simo, which is Italian, Chimo, S-I-M-O, which is Persian, what's it mean? Remarkable, as in relation to remarkable stories, remarkable nicknames, remarkable anything that involves a reflection of something else. So it kind of has a doppelganger feel to it, like you're doing representations of something else that are remarkable. And then the Colvin is the caretaker. Gibson is the cat, son of the cat. And Withrow is a reference to boating, mooring, Moorish, I think, and that was really super heavy Indian family, part of our family, too. Withrow, one who rows or one with row, which would be possibly a Moorish thing. I mean, that's the side of the family that looks very Negroid, to use. I don't know if that phrase is.
No, it's allowed. I mean,
to use anymore.
Don't worry about it. Yeah. It's not getting too crazy.
So putting it all together, you have family names that come up with something like caretaker of remarkable stories about the cat people who sail the seas or something like that. You see, it's like the names, the family names sort of add up to something. And so.
All right.
I mean, you find things like this, and I could find different names to come up with, but it's kind of interesting that that's sort of what the research has been leading toward.
Well, we've talked about the Moorish influence, the Mon words, the Mon root, for a couple of years. So what I'm asking you now is, because you come across things just of late, and of course that's not going to be the end of the deal, no doubt about it. You're going to keep on pursuing it. But what are you asking people to contemplate? Aside from the fact that you sent me that link about the Washita, what are we looking at as far as the really early origins of what we now know as the United States, and who was here first?
These Moorish folks in Louisiana are saying they were here first. They're very strong about it. They've got a bird city to prove it. And there's just a ton of evidence. I mean, you've got the government relying on the Montauk's records to verify who's indigenous and who's not.
And you believe that Smith, as a Mormon, and the Mormons in general, ran with the genealogical record keeping that was probably distinct to the Montauks at that time, that they've kept that alive and going. Would that be right?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they're, I mean, he actually went to the Moorish Charity School. So, I mean, maybe they're interested in keeping this heroic line in their minds for some reason. They do talk a lot about it. They call it the Lost Tribe of Israel, which I think may be part, I don't know if that's part of the disinformation, because I can't believe that, it's hard to believe that Mormonism, if it were trying to reflect the Moorish tradition, which you see in its name, Moor and Mound, it's obviously connecting itself to it. But is it representing it accurately, or is it trying to cover it up? And Moon kind of comes out and says that they've gotten corrupt and they're covering things up now. Some other power group wants to, keep the story down for a few more 100 years or however long.
What I'm picking up from this is that it would seem to insinuate that I wouldn't even call them Africans, blacks or whatever, Moors, whatever you want to, however, we're here, and that the purity of the white race is a myth.
Yeah, I think racism has got to be a big factor in the whole thing.
Okay, that makes sense.
And as far as the Mothman goes, the Mothman is what led me into all this, and the Mothman is basically a birdman who's giving people prophecies. And so I think that is an issue, too, for people, other power groups.
Well, how did you take it when you saw that video, a clip of which you sent to me, with that Hakeem Bey, when the woman who I guess was given the narrative, for the most part, was talking about the bird mound? I mean, that obviously perked up my ears. How did you take that?
Well, I was amazed.
Okay.
I mean, it just validates everything that we've been talking about. You've got a bird on a mound, actually, from the air, not just on a mound, not just being a mound, but on a mound in a very Christ-like symbol.
You mean outstretched arms and all that stuff, wing spread?
Yeah.
Kind of thing? Yeah.
And grasping in its claws, much like the eagle that we see today. These are the foundations of our of everything we have going.
Remember something you said before, the eagle with its snake and its talons, and that is Mexico's emblem. Ours has arrows in one hand, one talon.
Yeah, and all the, some of the subtle differences don't really matter to me that much.
No.
It's the basic idea.
But that it was embraced by not only by the United States, but by Mexico as well. And one of the things that's always been interesting to me, too, and this is another aside, is that, Mexico is called the United States of Mexico. So here you have the eagle being a symbol for both countries. Both have United States of in it. We have the talons and whatever is in the other talon. I mean, the arrows in the talon. I forget what's in the other one. And Mexico has a snake. So when you said that, I'm like, okay, this is kind of interesting. I mean, it's symbology with a point, I think. Not something to lose sleep over, but it's definitely interesting without a doubt.
Well, interesting, the Fowler name that they use for pharaohs, the pharaoh line, is a bird name, too. And the other one, Fuller, it denotes more spirit or something, the fullness, fuller. And that was one thing I noticed. And Moon talks a lot about this, the jinns, and how the word jinn has found its way into a lot of our words.
Will you spell that? Are we talking about G-I-N?
J-I-N-N-S, jinns, but those are genies, also called genies.
Okay, all right.
It's in a lot of our different words, and he mentions it here and there, and you finally get a sense of that the jinns are there to obstruct often, to play games with you, promise you things. You can use the jinns, you can be used by the jinns, and this may be another reason why the church and the Masons are so interested in following or obstructing with paranormal research, because I would assume they want less people controlling jinns than they control, because there's obviously an interest out there in some people in the occult world to use jinns to their advantage. It's not something I would recommend, but people do it. And at key times, jinns are basically gatekeepers. So anytime you're about to break through to a new understanding, you always have this aspect of human nature, you might say, that
are jinns tricksters?
Seems to have an outside force connected to it, and this may be the Men in Black, this may be the ultra-terrestrials that are talked about in the Mothman story and other stories.
All right, would I ask you, are jinns tricksters necessarily?
Yeah, I think they are.
All right, now I'm going to ask you this. In West Virginia, where you grew up, did you ever use the corruption as you all, as they say in the South, would be y'all? Did you ever use yins? Yins going to the dance? Anything like that?
Ewans.
All right, because in southwest Pennsylvania, as I found out, yins, and again, I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to stretch a corruption of jinns or whatever, but it's yins going. And I didn't know if that made its way into western Maryland and southeast Ohio or in northeast Virginia, West Virginia. But,
well, there are good jinns and bad jinns, too, though. So some words like genuine, denote something positive about a magical. Oxygen is the thing we breathe that magically makes us live.
All right.
Moon gets into all these things, and it's really detailed. Going from word to word to word, finding out what its overall meaning is, and it is hard to remember all that stuff, and I often have to go back and read the book 2 or 3 times.
Well, let me ask you, and then I want to center on a couple of things, because, boy, you sent me stuff that was really good, and I think some of this we're going to have to leave for another show altogether. But as I was looking at this, and I'm thinking about talking to Adam earlier in the day, Go Rightly, we were kind of talking a little bit, and I don't know if we want to bring this back, to what has taken place recently. Because what you went into, and I don't know if you want to do this, and I'm looking through the pages, and I'm obviously trying to buy time, I'll admit that. But that 1111 stuff you sent me, I don't think we could do justice to it right now, and it is really extremely interesting. So what I guess I'm doing, I'm at a crossroads here, and I would like to leave that for another day if that's at all possible. And I'm going to give that coin toss to you. Do we want to go back and talk about August and wrap up this with what has been taking place with the remnants of that whole Manson atrocity? Or do we want to delve into, not that we finish what we were doing, but the 1111 that you sent me, which is like really heavy duty? How do you want to play that, Andrew? I mean, because whatever we do, we're going to get back another day.
Well, I've got like just a couple of little items. One is an 1111 item, and I guess when you talk about the 1111, are you talking about the watches stopping? What exactly are you?
Well, I mean, I'm looking at what you wrote me, which, okay, look, I mean, 9 and 11 are heavy occult numbers. 9 has been, for the most part, I think, pretty much for those who are involved in this, not for the herd, the masses of America. But we understand that 9 and 11 have some very heavy occult weight. And what you sent to me about the 1111, I think we have to deal with at another time. But, when you sent out that spate of emails in which you came upon, I mean, I wouldn't call it an epiphany, but you found some stuff, and man, I mean, it was interesting. We could not do this all at one time. So what I'm talking about is the 1111 significance. Do you remember sending that?
Yeah, well, did you read those on the blog?
No, I didn't read it on the blog. I printed out what you sent me. And that's when I said to you, I'm going, well, you can't dismiss this. This is pretty interesting. But boy, that's, whew.
Well, I could mention a couple of things about 1111, and then we could revisit it later. Again, I'm not exactly sure what part of it, if you're talking about the watches or the recent trip to the Mothman Festival, which I was just at. The guy that used to live in the Mothman house, I guess you'd call it, where Tommy Burnham had seen the 911 thing. He was at the festival, and he's living there now in Point Pleasant. And he raises his hand during my talk and says that he's been plagued by 11s and 111s and 1111s for his whole life.
All right. Andrew, it's a combination of everything because, again, some of this comes from Peter Moon with the reference to the twin stars. And
oh, yeah, the twin stars. Well, those twin stars we just talked about.
Yeah, we did with the hexagram and the pentagram, right?
Yeah, and that relates to the Moorish women in Africa, in the Tuaregs, who are the ones that have the high incidence of self-impregnation. They were worshiping Sirius and trying to use light from Sirius to create a goddess of night on Earth. And I guess the Great Pyramid was doing that as well. So you have things in Egypt and things in over near Timbuktu. These two, centers of learning that were trying to.
But that's not a big aha.
Sirius is the twin stars, so this somehow relates to Sirius, and I guess fuels all these theories that we came from Sirius, first to Mars and then to Earth from Sirius.
But even the idea, I mean, all right, let me just say this, and again, this is going to derail us, I know, but, my fault. 9/11, used as the number for emergencies, of course, has been with us for some time. That we were struck by supposed terrorists on 9/11, I don't think was a coincidence. I mean, I do think it was a coincidence, and I think it was a very bad joke on us. And yet, taking the numbers 9 and 11 separately, I think have a pretty heavy occult symbolism. And I will tell you that, and I won't go into this now, but there was an author who wrote about the what might have been considered the true birth date of Christ, and this is back in the early 90s. And this author came down with the fact that he probably was born, Christ was born on September 11th, 9/11. I'll let that go for now, and I know that's a heavy-duty thing, but you can look that up for yourselves. So when you sent this to me, Andrew, I was wondering, I mean, what you kind of did for me was kind of give some more support to the fact that of the two numbers, 9 and 11, 11 has a pretty decent history in occultism and as what you would call, a worshipful number or a sacred number. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and there was a lady at the Mothman Festival who came from Newfoundland who told me that there's a ritual you can do with 11 stones. putting them around your space, you can drive out any jinns. But you have to have a 12th stone pointing toward the west.
All right, hold on. This was a nun, wasn't it?
She worked at a nunnery. She was a doctor at a convent.
She wasn't necessarily a nun then.
Right.
Okay. But she said that there was a ceremony where you would. Let me just read this back.
She had grown up in Point Pleasant.
Oh, jeez. All right. So, and that's when you actually met her, didn't you?
Yeah, and there was, and somehow it got me onto this information about how there was an island off Newfoundland that used to be used by people coming from Europe, and they could land there and get water, and there were no Indians on it, and so that would explain why there wasn't much trouble up there. And then they would get down, then they might stop at Montauk next, and then they might, continue on around the country and end up in the Mississippi Delta. So there's, these different stopping points that, or Florida, there's these different stopping points that they could have stopped at and deposited different tribes and things. But they're all related in that they were, of Moorish descent. You know the story that there is believed to be somewhere in the Maritimes, on some island or whatever, the burial of some treasure that the Spaniards might have offloaded before they went east to, back to Spain, mainly because, well, one, they feared pirates, or two, they knew they were going to hit bad weather at the time of the year that they traversed the Atlantic Ocean. Are you familiar with that at all? Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I have no idea. But, I mean, all attempts to try to unearth where that treasure is have met with not only failure but deaths. But let me read this to you back, because, I mean, this is what you wrote me. Strangely, at the festival, a motorcycle-riding nun from Newfoundland came up and brought a copy of everything I have done. She said that she grew up in the area, which is what you said. She looked Indian or Asian or some strange mix that you normally wouldn't see in West Virginia, and that's agreed. She told me about an occult method for protecting against spirits. It was a circle of 11 stones with a 12th, which had to be a seashell, pointing off to the west. It made me think of the painter's key symbol and, of course, 11 plus 1. Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and of course that went down, didn't? I mean, that actually happened. Yeah. And I don't know if we talked about the 1111 thing that I had found out earlier. Both of my watches stopped at 111. And then it sort of twigged me on an idea having to do with 1111 and that it comes from the Masonic symbol of the platform of reality on which they want to control, and at each corner there's columns. And my grandfather used to talk about this, and he was, I don't think he was in a fox hunting club. I don't think he was a Mason, but he probably was an unofficial Mason. But he would describe it that way. He would describe the world as a square with these 4 columns, angelic columns at the corners. And this is what I found on George Washington's Masonic apron, this platform, and then all these symbols floating around. And these symbols are the ones that you find showing up in different places, one of which is the beehive at the very top, which takes the place of the Garuda. The Garuda would usually be at the top in a similar, because it was styled like a Tibetan Tonka. And then, so the Garuda is replaced by this beehive, and the beehive is the state emblem of Utah, so the Mormons took that on. But it also shows up in like the Kecksburg crash that I talked about, where the thing that fell out of the sky looked like that beehive shape. But the 1111 thing is, you see it in the columns. As you look at it via perspective, you see 1111, and that is the reality in which the Masons work. They want to control interpretation, what happens in that square. And there was one more thing. Oh, well, it relates as it relates to doppelgangers. Okay. If you were going to symbolize a doppelganger, it would be an 11. 1 and 1. Right. Well, obviously. You could say, 22, 33, 99, but okay, go ahead. Well, that's the most basic one. And it may explain why certain secret societies are so interested in twins. I remember there was something about twins. There's a lot of interesting information about twins, actually. But these doppelgangers have been showing up in different places in our modern story here, our recent research. We've had a few of them. And as I said, there's an element of that in my name, in my family name. But this kind of shocked me. I was reading a book about cine-ethnography, which is kind of what I do. I studied with the guy that translated the book in college. And it was about this French filmmaker who spent a lot of time in Africa filming all the different tribes. And there was a mention in there that the African shamans are called hayukas, which if you remember back to our earlier discussions, that's almost exactly the same as the Native Americans' word for shamans who have seen the Thunderbird or the Mothman. So it's looking like the Thunderbird tribes in America that I've run across and that you read about, they're using African language to describe this phenomenon. And the important thing about it is that in Africa, those shamans are engaged in the act of trying to create doppelgangers. Anytime you have a medicine man who's trying to create doppelgangers using mystical energy, they're usually a member of the hayukas. Excuse me. Anyway, it dropped me. It dropped me almost when I saw that, because anyway, there's lots of things like that. You can find different words that carry over.
Well, yeah.
One other little doppelgangery thing is that when you go to West Virginia and you go to Point Pleasant, you'll see that the military guy who's big around there in the past, who trailblazed a lot of things, was George Rogers Clark. It turns out that George Clark is the name of a CIA agent who was manipulating Ted Owens. Owens was from the area. He was a little more west in Ohio and Indiana. But he was probably one of the most famous psychics, if not the most famous one in the 60s. And this was, of course, when Mothman was happening. And it could be another one of these name game things as it relates to Point Pleasant, in that an agent was using a name that would clue us in. It obviously was a false name if you read the book. So he's giving a clue about the area, Point Pleasant area, in his use of a alias. I think all the different aliases in the Mothman story have symbolic information sort of encoded in them. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. No, I'm listening. Believe me, I actually do that. No, I'm just looking and listening to what you're saying. One of the things I was thinking about also, to let you know that I am indeed listening, and, it's something that always struck me. It's like we have a Point Pleasant in New Jersey, which made sense because it's like, obviously on Ocean's Edge. But I was always wondering about why there was a Point Pleasant. What would that be, on the West Virginia side of the Ohio River?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so anyway. Yeah.
Well, it was originally called Moortown.
Moortown. All right, so what would you make then out of New Jersey with Morristown? Although, let's face it, there were Morrises that were involved among the founding fathers. Now, where they came from is another story, but I'm assuming that Morristown was named after a Morris.
Yeah. One of the things I've been doing here is I've just gone back and touching on things that we talked about before and showing how there's really a Moorish thing going on there, and it's something that we weren't really aware of. We were aware of the general idea, but we weren't aware of some of the detailed little name things. For instance, when I went to New Mexico and I talked about there's a bird rock there that looks like a Garuda, like a carving.
Yeah.
The site itself has a crescent moon in the, and I may have mentioned it actually, that it was Moorish. That would appear, even the tribes out west were using, especially California. There's tons of stuff now coming out that Moon got into that I can look for now about California and the Indians there, how they were also Moorish. But one of the things that came up, and I guess we'll talk about this later, is that Moon says that they discovered this Romanian cave that has a holographic hall of records in it. And the odd thing I noticed about it was the day that it was discovered was, or the month that it was discovered was the same month in August of 2003 when the Eye of Horus crop circle appeared near Point Pleasant, near the Serpent Mount, across the street from the Serpent Mount, and that I had seen.
But Moon's writing, I guess that would be in what? Isn't that incorporated in the book, what, Transylvania Sunrise or something like that?
Yeah. And the whole story to me sounds like a newly packaged version of some of the older stories about Tibet that Theosophus came up with.
What is he saying? That there is a holographic record hall inside the Romanian, Transylvanian Alps?
Yeah, the guy, the Romanian who wrote the book says that. Yeah, Moon's just sort of playing along, I think. He's sort of like he did with Montauk and all the time travel stuff. He sort of let Al Bielek go about his business, claiming whatever time travel stuff.
Well, I mean...
But as far as time travel goes, I mean, if this is a holographic hall that allows you to have time travel, it could be real or it could be a covert op designed to fool us all or manipulate us. Because as far as I can tell, the only time travel you can do is through random interaction with some of these ancient sites that the Moors have already encoded with that kind of information. I think you can get some, if you see Mothman or Thunderbird, you have a good chance of getting some precognitions of the future. But I think to try to develop it into a machine is probably not going to happen, and that when it is claimed, it's probably not true.
Well, I was speaking with someone who made a point, and I'll just throw it to you, that sometimes in this whole conspiracy alternative, radio thing, you unearth things or things are discussed that probably may not be in the realm of actuality. However, it might serve to make those who tune into this believe that they are, completely under the thumb and there's no way out and the government is the only way to go. And what you just mentioned, I mean, with the thought of having that in, Romania, that there would be a holographic hall of records, I mean, that's a mind blower. How much do you think this might be disinformation thrown out there or a twist about what really might be real? And what would the effects be upon those who encountered this, since it would be a smaller majority, and that's a wrong word to use, a minority, because most people aren't listening to internet radio or shortwave radio or all that. What would be the benefit gained by promoting something like that?
Well, I think it's a hard one. I mean, there could be lots of reasons. I just know that it's an older meme that's been put out before. Like Rampa, he wrote about that.
Okay.
That involved Ray Barker and John Keel in the sense that they wrote the intro to one of his books. And those were tales spun that had very similar content.
Okay.
Caves that have time machines that the Tibetans connects to Tibet and all that. It's just, since it's been around before, I tend to doubt it.
Okay.
But it got me thinking about this concept of a skeleton meditating in a mound, and And by the way, mausoleum, the word mausoleum starts with cat. M-A-U is cat in Egyptian. So it's a reference to the Egyptians. And then I remember we talked a bit about the skull and how the skull is in the shape of a mound, and it may be that way for a reason, in that it's encasing, the activity in the brain, and a mound may do the same. And as far as holography goes, I was thinking, they're indirectly co-opting the story of Mothman and the story of Bigfoot or whatever, because when you start saying that you have a machine that can create holograms, you're taking the juice out of the truth about these creatures. I think these creatures are holographic. Now, most people don't think that, so I don't think it's going to make a big difference if they say they have a holographic Hall of Records. But it does start to creep in that direction, and there's been a lot of talk about that kind of research being done in West Virginia as well, in different what they call vortexes. But essentially what's happening for people that are experiencing this, now I think that the creatures do appear to become physical to some degree, but I think a lot of it's happening in the mind, because although there's something there, the person seems to see it differently, and it can change in front of them. So the holographic hall in your head is also involved, and and magnetism and different spectral forms or waves are influencing that. And I just wondered if it had to do with the name hollow. For the hollows, that's a very common word in West Virginia. And if there's something about certain hollows that, it's a kind of a trivial connection, I know, but it still resonated with me when I heard it. There's something about these hollows, and I remember at one time thinking that it was the intricate nature of the hollows. If you look at West Virginia from a map, it literally looks like the human brain. I mean, it's just these convoluted, swirling, interlinking ridges. And it may just be something about the overall way the land is, that magnetism achieves that dynamism, that magnetism gets a complex signature, is what they call it, and that signature tends to create more of these kinds of interactions with humans.
Well, I just want to say we have not talked about this before, but we're with Andy Colvin. The website's andycolvin.com. And Andy, what book is the latest edition that you have out now?
The Mothman's Photographer 3. I've got 4 and 5. 4's edited pretty much. 5's needs a little more editing. But they're basically done, and it's just I just had to move this summer, so my life's a little unorganized right now.
Right, I understand completely.
those will be put together real soon, and there's also a possible reprint of another Gray Barker book is one on the Men in Black. We've actually got that all typed up, so we're kind of waiting on artwork and some more editing. And there's a book with Bruce Bickford, which is a fictional tale about Mothman's missing head. How do you explain Mothman's missing head? And there's a book with Adam Gorightly that we keep threatening to do. Hasn't gotten very far so far, but.
No, I mean, and you guys will be together on this show because I talked to him earlier today, and it's a show that'll pop up before yours. And so there's some ground to cover there, too. But what we spoke about was with relation to the whole Manson situation and that absolute bizarre, situation in early August of 1969, which was like, when I was growing up, I was like, what is this all about? I mean, that was an affront to everybody. But anyway, that was what we talked about. And you know, I think you and I, along with Adam, will revisit this whole situation too as it relates, because Adam also referenced you as to the roots that Moore and Manson had in a neighborhood close to your heart.
What was that? What did you say?
Manson and Moore spent some time in a neighborhood not far from you. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, I thought you had a bombshell.
Oh no, nothing. No.
Okay.
We just we went through a lot of stuff, and we deferred also to you for what you had found out, and that's it. I mean, that the fact that you you know, we're in an interview later in the day after I did it with Adam. But
well, I think there's a lot of indications that Manson was Moorish or something going on Masonically with him. He mentions Moorhead, Kentucky in his interviews often, and not Ashland. Moorhead would be probably a Moorish stronghold in earlier days. And his name, his mother's name, Maddox.
Maddox, yeah.
Is a derivation, could be a derivation of Maddox.
Yep.
Which goes back to a Moorish Welsh king who left, and may have been the brother of King Arthur, who left and came to America and went up the Mississippi, apparently, and started, but went to Montauk first.
And then you have Sarah Jane Moore, who denies that she lived in the same neighborhood, and now is you know, somewhere in upstate New York, which is another whole deal. We'll deal with that later. Which is also very interesting. I mean, she has the Moore name as well. You can't make this stuff up. But, I mean, lastly, I tell you what, we'll pick this up. There's a lot more to do. We're not going to get it all done. I mean, we're almost on 2 hours anyway. But let me just ask you from a distance. You know, here we have the 40th anniversary in August of the Manson murders. And, I mean, I don't even want to call them Manson murders because the guy was not involved in any of them. But we have that anniversary, and then we have Atkins' death, the release of Moore, the release of Fromm, and then we have Roman Polanski getting bagged and put in prison at the same time in Switzerland, which he's like gone in and out of like a revolving door. And I'm only going to ask you, and I'm sure you haven't thought much about this, but isn't it a little kind of crazy that all this stuff would be happening at this time?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, though, in the sense that if you view the whole thing as a way to manipulate the public, I mean, the original killings were hyped and dealt with in a way as to manipulate the public into thinking that hippies are dangerous.
Yeah, that is true.
And I think they're still using it for that purpose. I think releasing all these people this year takes some of the pressure off of the enormous ripoff that's occurred under not just Bush, who started it, but Obama, who escalated it. Escalated the war, escalated the amount of money given to bankers. And this just keeps everybody from thinking about those more important questions.
All right, so you're saying, I mean, we've done this before, and that's kind of been the center point of what we've done, that the release of this kind of information and for all the media to kind of like hone in on this is a distraction from what really is going on. Would that be accurate?
Yes, and it's always in the middle of August that you have, you know, August 12th is the birthday of ISIS. It's the, the important, most important Moorish or Masonic day of the year. Right. And every year you have a U.S. military surge somewhere. And in this case, there were two of them in Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And you know that they're timing it for this, you know, there's a long history of Masonic military connection. And, you know, that's who's running the show, really.
Yeah, and what I find interesting is, and of course I've always said this, and I mean, there's no argument with you, but no matter what administration's in there, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, we're not coming out of the Middle East, and that's for a future showdown. And, we know, I mean, they're tinkering with should 40,000 troops more be sent in Afghanistan, and I would say it's a done deal. It's going to happen because we're not coming out of there. We'll never see ourselves come out of the Middle East, and I believe it's because of a three-way gunfight that will take place, who knows, maybe in 2016 or so, I don't know. And that is Russia and China coming down to Iran's aid, even though they're wagging their finger at Iran now for being bad boys with nuclear enrichment. So
I think the whole stuff in August is about we're going to do a surge, we're going to go kill some people, and we're going to give some money to the banks, which also happened on the 12th.
All right.
They came to an agreement with the UBS, which is a huge Swiss banking conglomerate.
Oh, yeah.
All that happened a lot of stuff happened on the 12th. They also had this amazing story about a new planet that orbits in the wrong direction called WASP 17.
Oh, really? I'm not.
Yes.
You got me.
I interpreted that as a hypnotic suggestion. The story itself is suggesting that you start thinking differently. You start.
A counter.
Yeah.
Yeah, counterclocking your thought process.
Yeah. You thought, you elected Obama, you thought it was going to go this way. Now just start to realize that torture is good. Surges are good. Cheney's good because he went on the air the next day and started going after Bush. Hillary was in the news on the 11th about she wears the pants in the family. She got into that little thing about that.
Well, yeah, much wider pants than Bill wears. Yeah. Okay.
Right, and so you blend all these together, and you can see that wearing the pants in the family connected with the planets orbiting in the wrong direction could be some kind of subconscious suggestion having to do with women's lib or who knows what. I mean, it depends on what people are interested in. What they make sure to limit the amount of stories you're going to look at. I think they're really getting good at giving you a nice little selection that you can sort of that will not create a democratically courageous person.
But Andy, I mean, newspapers. I mean, I'll take that and extrapolate it because it's the same with electronic journalism, and that is you have 5 to 7 news holes that would represent the front page of a newspaper, but you bring that also into radio and more, but less radio, but definitely into TV, and you keep those things up front. In fact, I asked Lady Viz the other day, I'm going, do you remember about some of these abductions we talked about, but the woman who was plucked out from, her walk? And I'm like, whatever happened to that? And that bothers me because it's like, well, you got me all involved in it, and then it went away, and I have no idea what the resolution of this was, if there was anything at all. So, Andy, I mean, you said it right. I mean, you are involved with 5 to 7 news holes to keep people all roiled up and screwed around. And go counter for themselves. I mean, it's the same story now as it was back then. As documented in the congressional record, that, Rockefeller and Carnegie grabbed a hold of the major newspapers at the time and said, this is the way it's going to go. And it's not stopped since. I mean, I'm sorry, but the Today Show from Rockefeller Center, I mean, those are the worst propagandists I've ever seen. I mean, it makes me want to puke. So, anyway, yeah, that's how it is, and it's a manipulation. There's no doubt about it, to keep everybody freaked out just to a point, and then they back it off a little bit. And I would say to you this, I don't know if you watched today, Andy, but one of the, valve releasers was they told people that your heating bills will be down considerably this winter, those especially on oil and natural gas. So, where everybody's getting all freaked out, now all of a sudden they feel like a little bit of a respite. Have you heard this at all? I doubt it.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I don't know.
No, okay, that's all right. No, it's okay. But I'm just telling you, I mean, so what happens is they get people freaked out about 6 items, and they give them a little bit with the 7th item. And that's the formula, and it will continue to be like that into wherever we're going, and God knows where that's going to lead us. But
well, also in August, as they were telling us to think differently, they were throwing out Obama is a racist. That was one of the memes. So they're asking people to start thinking backwards about Obama, and they always, of course, use the racist angle. Rove was out there as well on the 11th, pissed about something, and so all of your usual characters made their appearances that week.
In August, yeah.
And then not long after that, the CIA, about a week later, the CIA was had tortured 100 Iraqis to death. I think the number's a lot higher, but even that story was something that had to be dealt with. And so suddenly the Lockerbie bomber thing comes in on the same day and wipes the torture story off the map. So then we spent a week talking about the Lockerbie bomber. So they always use their previous ops. You know, they bring them back, and we've talked about that before. And the bringing back of the whole Manson thing is a similar thing to bringing back the Lockerbie thing. Both setups that were used for, you know, political reasons.
Well, you know, we passed the autumnal equinox, and we're headed for the winter solstice. And I'm wondering if, in between that time, if that's a high occult situation, because it does incorporate, you know, All Hallows Eve and all that other jazz.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the descension, obviously, of sunlight and a certain amount of depression that comes with it for those who are SAD affected or whatever. I mean, nobody really likes it. You know, we all like more sunlight, and, of course, that's just not the way it goes. But I'm wondering, you know, too, if this isn't all orchestrated also for, you know, and I never thought about this, Andy, you know, with regard to what takes place between September 21st and December 21st or whatever. And we all know from December 21st to, like, what, March 21st, it's like, you know, it's darkness and, you know, we'll come out of this. I mean, do you see anything in this at all? I mean, have you thought about it whatsoever?
Well, September 11th is one of those dates, although it comes before the 21st. And this year we had a lot of activity leading up to that, which wasn't very long after the middle week of August.
Okay.
And they had an attack on an Afghan spy boss. They found a 1 billion barrel oil well in the Gulf. You notice they're always finding new oil wells.
Wherever they want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt.
And yet the price stays up.
Yeah, of course.
They had the Blanco, Texas Chupacabra on September 2nd. That was sort of a reprise of the Chupacabra that had been seen in Texas the year before in August. Blackwater got its contract extended on the 2nd. They had shuttle rocket trash. There was some scare with a shuttle hitting rocket trash in space. So you had your NASA story. Pfizer got fined $2 billion. Some stuff about the planes falling apart came out. NATO bombed Afghanistan. Unemployment hit a high. North Korea nuke scares were in the news. So they gave us their usual mix. There was a terror plot in the UK.
Right,
on the
they
7th.
rotated. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And on the 7th, they also had this amazing story from Time that the Army's going to train 1 million soldiers in meditation at Fort Bragg. Yeah. Yeah, and then at the end of that week, I started getting the painter's key synchronicity stuff going, where I was cluing into that symbol. And then the following week was the Mothman Festival. So they did. I think they laid off of us in September, pretty much.
Well, I mean,
you've always got something every day, but
Well, it keeps stuff going, and swine flu will be the next thing. But my assumption is, and you tell me what you think about this, and that is, as we get, obviously we're getting closer to Christmas and the buying season, so I'm assuming that the swine flu thing will be the last boogeyman they'll throw out there, because they want all the assholes who have no money to go out and buy for Christmas, telling them it's going to be okay, economic, upturn is just around the corner, bullshit. But here we go with the old, hype to get them out to go to the malls to buy. And it'll be interesting to see just how much they can stimulate these idiots who have no money to buy stuff. You know how it goes. I mean, I'm sorry to say it, but it's just not the way it used to be.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take that as a yes. No, I mean, all the news now is that it's better, and it's not better. More and more people are out of work. That whole thing about trying to get money down to people who are trying to get out from under with their mortgages only went to about 12% of the people. One of my neighbors, whom I think are really good people, husband and wife, both, husband working, wife doing her job, and wanting to go to work, and 2 children might have to abandon their home because the bank will not take anything less than the full mortgage payment. And that's blowing my mind, because it's like, look, this guy's willing to pay wherever he's got, and he's willing to play catch-up. And not only him, but his wife, too, okay? Now, can you imagine that? I mean, so
well,
what happens?
apparently they were, when they started doing the subprime predatory, is a better word, predatory lending, they knew that people were going to default on it. They are planning on people defaulting.
Yeah, you're right. No doubt about it. They understood that this was the last, what would you say, leap of the American economy, because we don't do anything more except build houses and have people buy them.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an incestuous and what would you call it? An intra-economic situation which does not help the country. We're feeding off each other. And this had to happen sooner or later, and it finally did. And people are acting like it's still going to be a boom, and it ain't happening. So even though, I mean, we hear all these good news items on the economic channels, they're giving you bullshit because what they want you to do is go out and buy for Christmas. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to agree with that, Andy. I mean, what do you think, though?
No, I believe it. I agree.
All right.
Bush milked it. He milked the Treasury as much as he could with the war, and then when that ran out, they had to do the bank bailouts, and so the whole mortgage thing is just another last gasp to get all the disposable income that people had gathered up during the internet boom.
Now, I'm going to say this as we exit the second part of the interview, and you're not, I'm only asking you this not because you're an expert. I'm just asking you about, your bones. Considering where you are and what you see and your environment out, you're the most distant from me that there can be. I mean, I'm in the southeast, you're in the northwest. I know, what's happening down here, but I want to talk to you. And again, I mean, this is conjecture, I guess, to a certain extent. But let me ask you this. Okay? I mean, I'm not going to hold you to this. But do you believe that within the next 1 or 2 years under, idiot's reign, and I don't care if it's Bush or Obama, do you think we're going to see an economic collapse?
I think they chose to go for the long grinding collapse. I remember there were some stories about a year ago where the Bilderbergers were deciding whether to have a sudden collapse or a long grind out. I actually think they decided on both of them. Let's have a crash, and then let's grind it out for a few years where we just keep on.
Well, we had a kick in the balls, wouldn't you say, in late 2007. I'm not sure that that's the end of it.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Okay. All right.
The demographics, and I've known this for years because I had an investment friend who's really good with numbers just say to me, well, when we get closer to 2012, there's not going to be enough people being, that's when everything, he had studied it, he said, that's when it's all there's not going to be enough money coming into the tax base to support all the various things that need to be done. So real estate will have to decline in value.
Now, you're somewhat involved with construction, in a way, out in the Northwest. I mean, you'll tell me if you think you're emblematic of what's going on out there, or if, whatever you notice is a little bit myopic. But, what is the construction and housing situation out around you?
Well, it took a real big hit. There was not much work. Everybody that I've talked to has said this, all the different contractors.
Right.
I noticed a shift. One of the shifts they made was to much more immigrant labor than before. Now you have Central Americans doing what you call skilled labor, whereas that wasn't the case 20 years ago.
Framing and drywall?
Yeah. And so that's one thing that's occurred. The values have dropped in homes about 20% probably. We were lucky enough to sell our house and at something close to, its highest value.
Okay, good. All right.
It wasn't 20% less. It was more like 10 or 12% less than it was at its high. So I feel like I made a good choice and lucked out because there was one person. This is how bad the market is. Okay, I've got the house that I lived in had that beautiful view. It's like stunning and one of the best views in Seattle. And only one person stepped forward to buy it. really was interested in buying it. And that person works for Microsoft. And that's why they're able to do.
Ah, yes, that makes sense.
So it is an expensive house. I mean, for most people, $700,000. So that person, because they work at Microsoft, they have a good job.
And apparently secure.
And
that's the whole thing.
But everybody else, I think, they're just like, there's no way they could. I think everybody's been affected by it, and they can't afford a house that expensive. Although, really, the hit has come in the houses that are in the middle market, or the $400,000 homes. $400 to $500 is a typical price in Seattle, and those are not selling at all.
And let me ask you, by the way, I think we talked about this before, and it's nothing for nothing, but when you talked about the view, was the view of the Cascades?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought you told me. Okay. Which probably looks pretty good. I mean, not in the sunrise because the sun comes up in the east, but it might have been really beautiful when the sun was coming down in the west. Would that be right? It's beautiful all the time. Stunning in the morning, and in the evening you get a lot of reds reflecting from the other side. There's a spot about a block from my house up on the hill on the ridge, from that house, mind you, that's owned an old gas station owned by a friend of mine, and he's got views both ways. You can see the Olympics and the Cascades. It's one of the few spots you can see the city of Seattle and Mount Rainier and all that. It's a really special spot up there, and probably why it was so important to the Indians all the way down till today. No doubt. And if you're really unlucky, I might be a neighbor of yours in time to come.
Well, we're ready for you.
I don't think so, but anyway.
Will you rumble into town on your, when you rumble into town on your Harley or whatever? Do you have a Harley?
In the old days, that would be true, but now I'm going to rumble into my Toyota pickup truck. I mean, no, those days are gone. We've been speaking with Andrew Colvin, as you might have guessed, and we've done a long two-parter, which is not unusual. His website is andycolvin.com, and he's written, I don't know how many. Andy, how many Mothmans are out there now?
My book? My books, I've got the 3 books, and 2 more in the can. The Mothman series, DVD series. I sold quite a few of those at the festival.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
I've got some new information, new episodes actually from last year on there.
Beautiful. All right. Good.
Up to 36 hours.
All right. And they can access them by going to andycolvin.com?
Yeah, and also eBay and Amazon's got all the books. There's the Silver Bridge book, which I republished by Gray Barker. That's a fine Mothman tale as well. Okay.
We'll be talking to you very shortly. Now,
excuse me, did you happen to get that song I sent, our new song?
No.
You didn't? Okay.
You send it, and I'll put it as outro to this show.
Okay.
Which I've done before. No, send me the MP3 by all means. And again, we've been talking to Andy Colvin regarding the Mothman and many other things. And those of you who have been with us for all this time, it's not a big deal because you know where we're going. And even though we don't know where we're going, we're all going together. And I think it's a pretty good journey, but there's more to it. Excuse me to say more, but there's more to it. And we'll probably focus in on that more as we go on, because I want to talk to you about that video you sent me and the legitimacy of the claims, which I'm all open for. And I'm glad, by the way, Andy, that Jim sent you that along, because I've been meaning to get in contact with him. I was wondering how he was doing. But apparently you have been in contact with Big Jim in Illinois. Is that right?
Yes.
That's good. All right. I'm happy. He's a good man. All right. So thanks for being with us, and we'll revisit you again. And, of course, my hope is that you and Go Rightly will join me with with a little look at the Manson situation, okay?
Okay, great.
Hey, listen, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.